My reputation needs a wife, and your shop needs a miracle. Let's not pretend this is about anything else." Tyler Blackwood didn't look like a man asking for a favor. He looked like a man closing a hostile takeover. He was leaned across the mahogany desk of his penthouse office, his suit jacket off, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms that had no business belonging to an architect. The evening sun was setting behind him, casting the skyscrapers of the city in shades of bruised purple and gold, but Tyler didn't look at the view. He looked at me, his dark eyes tracking every breath I took, every nervous twitch of my fingers. I looked at the check sitting between us. It was for $50,000, the exact amount I needed to stop the bank from foreclosing on my mother's flower shop. The shop was her life. It was the only thing we had left of my father. "And all I have to do is pretend to be your girlfriend?" I asked, my voice trembling more than I wanted it to. I hated how small I felt in this room of glass and steel. "Not just a girlfriend," Tyler corrected, leaning back. The leather of his chair creaked, a sharp sound in the silence. "The woman I'm going to marry, the city council is old-fashioned. They won't grant the waterfront project to a playboy who spends his nights in tabloids. They want a family man. They want stability. I need a respectable partner for the next month of galas and press junkets. You need the money to save your legacy. It's a clean break, Diane. No strings, no history." "No feelings?" I asked. My heart was thundering so loud I was sure he could hear it. I knew Tyler's reputation. He was brilliant, cold, and had a different woman on his arm every week. He was everything I usually avoided. He was a man who built walls for a living, both literal and metaphorical. Tyler laughed, a dry, cynical sound that didn't reach his eyes. "I don't do feelings, Diane. I do blueprints and steel. I do structural integrity. Feelings are for people who have time to waste on things they can't control. We'll have a legal contract drawn up by my team. No touching unless it's for the cameras. No private dates. On day 31, the money is yours and we go our separate ways. We become strangers again." I picked up the heavy fountain pen. My hand was shaking. As I signed my name next to his bold, aggressive script, I caught a glimpse of something in his gaze. It wasn't coldness. It was a flickering, desperate hunger that made my skin tingle. I told myself I was doing this for the shop. I told myself I could handle 30 days of acting. I had no idea that by day 2, the contract would already feel like a lie I was telling myself. The first public appearance was the Founders Ball, the biggest event on the city's social calendar. Tyler had sent a dress to my tiny apartment, a silk, emerald green slip dress that felt like liquid against my skin. It was more expensive than my entire wardrobe combined. When his black town car pulled up to my curb, I felt like an imposter stepping into a fairy tale I hadn't asked for. "You look adequate," Tyler said as I climbed into the back seat, but his eyes said something entirely different. They traveled from my heels to my neck, lingering on my collarbone until I felt a flush creep up my cheeks. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, his dark hair slicked back. He looked like a king, and I was just the girl from the flower shop. "Adequate, truly the romantic I signed up for," I shot back, trying to hide my nerves with sarcasm. "Don't overwhelm me with your compliments, Mr. Blackwood." "Remember the rules," he murmured, ignoring my jab as we reached the red carpet. The flashes of the paparazzi were already popping outside. Hand on my arm. Smile at the cameras like I'm the only man in the room. If I lean in to whisper, look like I'm telling you I love you, not that I'm bored out of my mind by these people. We are the perfect couple tonight. The moment we stepped out, the noise was overwhelming. Tyler's arm slid around my waist, his palm warm and firm against the small of my back. It wasn't the polite touch of a business partner. It was possessive. He pulled me flush against his side, and the scent of his expensive cologne, sandalwood and citrus, wrapped around me like a blanket. I found myself leaning into him, guided by the strength of his frame. Inside the ballroom, we danced. Tyler was a surprisingly good lead, moving us across the floor with effortless grace. "You're stiff," he whispered into my ear, his breath tickling my skin and sending a shiver down my spine. "I'm not used to being watched by 300 people waiting for me to trip," I hissed back. "Don't look at them," he commanded, his grip tightening. "Look at me, only me." I did. I looked into those deep, dark eyes, and for a second the room vanished. The cynical architect was gone, replaced by a man who was looking at me with an intensity that felt terrifyingly real. My hand moved from his shoulder to the nape of his neck, my fingers brushing the soft hair there. Tyler's breath hitched. For a heartbeat, the act wasn't an act anymore. The world slowed down. Then the music stopped, and he pulled away so fast it felt like a slap. "Good job, Diane," he said, his voice cold again as he adjusted his cuffs. The councilman was impressed. Our work here is done. By day 10, the routine should have been easy, but the silence between our public appearances was becoming louder. The more time I spent with Tyler, the more I realized the Playboy architect was a carefully constructed mask. We were at his office late one night, supposedly rehearsing talking points for an interview about our whirlwind romance, when the exhaustion finally hit him. He had fallen asleep at his desk, his head resting on his arms. He looked younger when he was asleep. The harsh lines of his face softened, and the constant tension in his broad shoulders vanished. I walked over to drape his discarded coat over him, but my hand paused. Scattered across his desk weren't just blueprints for the cold, steel waterfront project. They were hand-drawn sketches of a small, sun-drenched cottage, the kind of place someone builds when they're dreaming of a home, not a career. It had a wraparound porch and space for a garden. Tyler stirred, his eyes snapping open. He saw me looking at the sketches and shoved them into a drawer immediately, his face darkening. "It's nothing," he snapped, his voice rough with sleep. "Just a doodle." "It's beautiful, Tyler. It doesn't look like your usual work. It looks peaceful." "Because it isn't work. It's a fantasy," he said, standing up and packing the floor of his office like a caged animal. "My father spent his life building skyscrapers that nobody loved. He died in an office just like this one, alone. I promised myself I'd build something that lasted. But the world doesn't want homey, Diane. They want imposing. They want to be intimidated, just like they want me to be the guy who doesn't care about anything but the bottom line." "Is that why you made the deal? To prove you don't care?" I stepped closer to him, braving the cold aura he tried to project. He stopped packing and looked at me, his expression raw and unguarded for the first time. "I made the deal because I'm tired of being alone in rooms full of people, Diane, but having you here, it's making the silence much louder when you leave at night." He took a step toward me, the air in the office suddenly thick and heavy with unspoken words. He reached out, his thumb grazing my lower lip. It was the first time he'd touched me without a camera watching. It was slow, tentative, and filled with a longing that made my heart ache. 20 days left," he whispered, his voice dropping to a gravelly tone. "I don't think I'm going to make it to the end of the month without breaking my own rules." Day 15 brought a torrential downpour that turned the city streets into rivers. We were stranded in a small, neon-lit roadside diner after his car broke down on the way back from a site visit. We were shivering and damp, tucked into a corner booth with the smell of grease and old coffee in the air. Tyler had insisted I wear his wool jacket, which was far too big for me and smelled intoxicatingly like him. "Why the flowers, Diane?" he asked, watching me fiddle with a lonely, wilted carnation from the table's plastic bud vase. "Why risk everything for a shop that's barely breaking even in this economy? You could do anything." "Because flowers tell the stories people are too afraid to say out loud," I said softly, looking at the rain lashing against the window. "I've seen men buy roses for apologies they'll never voice. I've seen daughters buy lilies for mothers they haven't spoken to in years. It's not just a shop to me, Tyler. It's a place of connection. In a city this big, people are starving for a way to say, 'I see you.'" Tyler looked at me for a long time, the flickering neon light of the diner reflecting in the dark pools of his eyes. "I haven't had a connection like that in a long time, not since my mother passed away. She used to plant marigolds in the window box of our apartment. It was the only color in our world." "I'm sorry, Tyler, I didn't know." "Don't be," he said, reaching across the cracked laminate table to take my hand. His fingers interlaced with mine, his grip strong and warm. This time, he didn't pull away when he realized what he was doing. "You're the first person in years who hasn't looked at me and seen a paycheck or a project. You just see me. And for some reason, that's more terrifying than losing a multi-million-dollar contract. I see a man who's afraid to be happy because he thinks it'll make him weak," I challenged gently, squeezing his hand. Tyler didn't argue. He didn't retreat into his shell. Instead, he leaned across the table and kissed me. It wasn't the polished, for-show kiss of the gala. It was clumsy, desperate, and tasted like rain and salt. It was the moment I knew I was in deep trouble. I wasn't just playing a part anymore. I was falling for the man behind the deal, and I had exactly 15 days left to find a way to stop my heart from breaking when the contract ended. Day 20. The tension in the penthouse had reached a breaking point. We had spent nearly every waking hour together, and the rules of the contract had been incinerated by the heat growing between us. There were no more cameras to hide behind, no more reporters to impress. It was just us. We were in his sleek, modern kitchen, trying to make a late-night dinner, when I accidentally cut my finger on a sharp paring knife. Tyler was there in a heartbeat, his face pale with a concern that seemed disproportionate to a small cut. He took my hand, carefully washing the wound under the tap, his movements so gentle it brought tears to my eyes. "It's just a scratch, Tyler," I whispered, my heart racing as he patted my hand dry with a towel. "I don't care," he rasped, his eyes meeting mine. The air was electric, charged with the weight of 20 days of suppressed desire. "I can't stand the thought of you being hurt, not even a little bit." He didn't let go of my hand. He pulled me closer until my back was pressed against the cold marble counter and his body was a warm, solid weight against mine. His hands moved to my waist, and I could feel the heat of his palms through my shirt. Tyler leaned down, his forehead resting against mine. "The deal is over, Diane. I don't want the 30 days. I don't want the fake engagement. I want you. For real." When we made love that night, it was a release of every hidden urge and secret longing we'd built up. It was intense, visceral, and deeply emotional. It wasn't just physical. It was as if we were finally communicating without the masks we'd both worn for so long. His touch was a question, and my body was the answer. In the quiet aftermath, as I lay in the tangle of his silk sheets, watching the city lights flicker outside the window, I felt a terrifying sense of peace. I had found my home in the one man who swore he didn't have one. But as I drifted off to sleep in his arms, feeling his steady heartbeat against my back, I didn't see the envelope that had been slid under the door earlier that evening. A letter from the city council that was about to turn our real love into a public scandal that would threaten everything we'd built. The morning of day 25, the world exploded. I woke up to the sound of Tyler's phone buzzing incessantly on the nightstand. He was already standing by the window, staring out at the city, his jaw set in a hard, angry line. The leather folder that usually stayed locked in his desk, the one containing our signed contract, was splashed across the front page of every major tabloid. "Blackwood, fiancée, a paid actor, the $50K contract leaked," the headlines screamed. My heart plummeted into my stomach. Someone had found the paper. Someone had betrayed us. "Tyler, I started, clutching the sheet to my chest as I sat up. "The council is pulling the project, Diane," he said, his voice cold, colder than it had been on the day we met. He didn't even turn to look at me. "They're calling it a moral deception. They say they can't trust a man who buys his personal life. We can tell them the truth. We can tell them that it started as a deal, but it's real now. We can go to them together," I pleaded, stepping out of bed and walking toward him. "Is it real?" Tyler turned to me, his eyes filled with a mixture of hurt and the old cynicism that I thought I'd banished. "Or is this just another part of the performance? Did you leak it, Diane? My stepmother Beatrice has been trying to get me out of the firm for years, but she didn't have access to my private safe. You did." "How can you even ask me that?" I felt like I'd been punched. The air left my lungs. After last night, after everything we talked about. "Business is business, Diane. I forgot that for a moment. I let myself believe in the marigolds and the flower shop stories." He grabbed his coat, finally looking at me, but his gaze was vacant. "The check for the full $50,000 is on the table. Consider the contract terminated early. You got what you wanted. Your shop is safe. Leave the key with the doorman when you go." He walked out of the penthouse without another word. The slam of the door echoed through the empty rooms, sounding like a finality I wasn't ready to accept. I looked at the check, the money that was supposed to be my salvation, and I realized I'd never felt more like a failure. I had saved my mother's legacy, But I had lost the only man I'd ever truly loved because he was too scared to believe in something he couldn't sign a contract for. I went back to the flower shop. I paid off the bank, I painted the walls a soft cream color, and I filled the coolers with the freshest, most vibrant blooms in the city. On the surface, the shop was thriving, but inside it felt like a tomb. Every time the little brass bell over the door rang, my heart skipped a beat, hoping it was a tall man in a charcoal suit with a troubled look in his eyes. It never was. My mother found me crying in the back room on day 28, my hands stained with the green of flower stems. "He's a man who spent his life building walls to keep people out, Diane," she said gently, pulling me into a hug. "You can't expect a man like that to know how to live in a house with windows overnight. He's terrified." "He thinks I used him, Mom. He thinks it was all a play for the money. He doesn't believe that I love him." "Then show him it wasn't about the money," she said, pulling back to look me in the eye. "Tyler Blackwood deals in blueprints and logic. He thinks everything has a price. Give him a new blueprint, one that doesn't have a dollar sign attached to it." That night, I didn't go back to his penthouse to beg. I didn't call his office to plead my case. Instead, I went to the site of the waterfront project, the empty, windswept pier that had started this whole mess. It was a cold, lonely place, but as I stood there in the dark, I realized it wasn't empty to me anymore. I could see the community center he wanted to build. I could see the cottage from his sketches. I sat down on the cold concrete and started to write. I didn't write a legal document. I wrote a confession of every fear and hope I'd carried since day one. I wrote until my hand cramped and the sun began to peek over the horizon. Day 29 arrived with a sense of dread. I hadn't slept in nearly 48 hours. I had spent the time creating the most elaborate floral arrangement of my life. It wasn't a bouquet. It was a living map of the story we had shared over the last month. I used blue hydrangeas to represent the rain at the diner, white roses for the cottage he dreamed of, and deep green ivy for the life I wanted us to grow together. It was a massive, beautiful, fragile thing. I sent it to his office via private courier, along with the letter I'd written on the pier. "Tyler, the $50,000 is back in your account. I didn't use it. I realized that a shop without you in it isn't a shop worth saving. You deal in steel because it's hard to break, but you forget that steel is also cold. I deal in flowers because they're fragile and they die, but while they're here, they're beautiful and they grow. I don't want your money. I don't want a project. I just want the man who stayed awake to hold my hand in a diner when the world was raining. If you can't see that I'm standing here with my heart in my hands, then you're not the brilliant architect I thought you were. Because a real architect knows that a foundation isn't built on money or contracts. It's built on the trust that the person next to you won't let the roof fall in. I'm waiting at the shop. One last time." I waited. The clock on the wall of the shop ticked away the hours, each one feeling like a year. Customers came and went, oblivious to the fact that my entire world was hanging by a thread. The sun began to set on day 29, casting long, skeletal shadows across the floor. I closed the shop, the open sign clicking against the glass like a final heartbeat. I had gambled everything on a man who didn't believe in gambles. The final day of the deal arrived. I spent the morning sitting on the floor of the shop, surrounded by the scent of lilies and eucalyptus. I had stopped checking my phone. I had stopped looking at the door. I told myself that if he didn't come today, I would pack my bags and leave the city. I couldn't stay here, surrounded by the ghosts of a 30-day ghost story. The sun was almost gone, the sky turning a deep royal blue when a black town car pulled up to the curb. My heart stopped. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. The door opened and Tyler stepped out. He wasn't wearing his suit jacket. His shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, his hair was a mess as if he'd been running his hands through it all day, and in his hand he was clutching my letter so tightly the paper was wrinkled. He walked into the shop, the brass bell ringing with a sharp, clear tone. He didn't say a word at first. He just looked at me, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. He walked right up to me, trapped me between his arms, and kissed me with a ferocity that made my head spin. It was a kiss that asked for forgiveness and gave it all at once. "The council gave me the project back this afternoon." He rasped against my lips, his breath warm. "They did? How?" I whispered, clutching his shirt. I went to them and I told them the truth, Diane. All of it. I told them the contract was a mistake born of my own fear. I told them that the only thing fake about our relationship was the date we started. I told them that if they didn't want a man who was man enough to admit he'd fallen in love with the woman he tried to hire, then they could keep their project. You risked everything for me, after you thought I betrayed you. I realized that I can build 1,000 skyscrapers, but none of them will ever feel like a home as much as you do, he said, pulling back to look at me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. The 30 days are over, Diane. The contract is dead. I'm ready for the next 30 years. No money, no deals, just us. 1 year later. The waterfront project was finally complete, and it was the talk of the entire country. But it wasn't the cold, imposing skyscraper the council had originally asked for. It was a community center, a masterpiece of glass, natural light, and a massive indoor botanical garden that I managed. People didn't come there to feel intimidated. They came there to feel connected. It was the first building Tyler had ever built that had a soul. But my favorite place in the world wasn't the center. It was the small, sun-drenched cottage on the edge of the city, the one Tyler had sketched in secret and finally built for us. It had the wraparound porch and the garden I'd always wanted. We were standing in that garden now, the smell of night-blooming jasmine heavy in the air. Tyler was behind me, his strong arms wrapped around my waist, his chin resting on my shoulder as we watched the moon rise over the trees. "You're thinking about the deal again, aren't you?" he murmured into my ear, his voice full of a warmth I once thought impossible. "I was just thinking that $50,000 was a very low price for a husband," I teased, leaning my head back against him. "I think I got the better end of the bargain." Tyler laughed, a deep, rich sound that filled the garden. He turned me around to face him, his eyes filled with a peace and a love that still took my breath away every single day. "It was the best investment I ever made, even if the interest rates are a bit high." "Oh, and what's the interest on this deal?" I asked, smiling up at him. "A lifetime of flower stories," he said, his expression turning serious as he leaned down. "A lifetime of waking up next to you, and at least one more dance every single night." As we moved slowly together under the moonlight, the sounds of the night humming around us, I realized that the catch wasn't that I'd fallen for him. The catch was that I'd found the only person in the world who made the architecture of my life feel complete. The deal was done, the contract was a memory, and our real story was just beginning. We weren't just a stable image for the press anymore. We were a family. And that was a foundation that no storm could ever shake.